This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 103. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to be taking you through 6 reasons why you need a building automation system. Now, I got an email the other day from an email subscriber, and he was asking me something to the effect of, I've run into a lot of customers who ask me why they need a building automation system. And it looks like, Phil, that you haven't discussed that in any previous articles or any previous podcasts. I started thinking about that and I was like, you know what? He's right. I really haven't discussed that in any previous podcasts or any blog articles. So without further ado, we are going to dive into 6 reasons why you need a building automation system. And what I want you to do when you're listening to this is I don't want you to get caught up and think this is only for salespeople who are out there trying to sell a building automation system. So often as technicians, as project managers, as facility operators, we run into folks who just don't want to utilize the building automation system to its full potential. We run into operators who would rather run things in hand, in manual, rather than relying on the building automation system because, maybe that's how they've done things, maybe they think they know better, a variety of different reasons why. But when you listen to this episode, I want you to think about how can you use the information that you're going to learn in this episode to go and motivate folks to embrace the building automation system that they have, or maybe that they need, or even more likely that they haven't upgraded since, the 1970s, 1980s. So not every one of these reasons is going to apply to every specific situation, but pick and choose the reasons that do apply to the situation and will motivate whomever you're trying to influence to embrace the use and or the investment in a building automation system. All right, let's dive in. So, reason number 1 is you can't effectively control a building without a building automation system. Now, when I say you can't effectively control a building, I'll immediately get folks who will say, yeah, I can. I can put in a time clock and turn things on. Yeah, that may control a building in the terms of turning it on, but that's not effective control. I like to use the cruise control example, right? So if you're driving one car, you can go and drive without cruise control. As a matter of fact, I do not like to use cruise control. I just like to have my feet on the pedal and then just drive that way. It drives my wife bonkers because she likes the steadiness of cruise control. However, imagine if I was trying to emulate cruise control for 50 cars at the same time, or for 200 cars at the same time. That's what folks are doing when they are going and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to run my 50 air handlers in manual, and I'm going to tweak the valves to control to the discharge air temperature because I know better than this controller, or I'm going to go and completely bypass set point scheduling and anything and just run everything 24 hours a day. That would be like me trying to drive 50 cars all at the same time, controlling based on all the different variables that are on the road. And that is where a building automation system comes in. It never gets tired. It never sleeps. It is always going and adjusting the control to make sure that you're reaching set point in the most optimal way possible. In addition to that, there's these other standards that are really, in my opinion, they should be required in almost any building. And those are ASHRAE 62.1 and ASHRAE 55. Now, some of you who are on the engineering side are going to go, Phil, those are required. Well, they may be required during the initial construction of the building and checkout and design, But let's be real, it doesn't take very long for some facility operators to override actuators, to go and put things in hand, to just completely butcher what was put in place. And it's not just the operators. I don't want folks listening to this to feel like I'm picking on operators. I've seen technicians, I've seen engineers, I've seen salespeople all just butcher this up because either of improper understanding or just quite frankly not caring, being busy and having other quote unquote, I'm making air quotes here, better things to do. So in reality, the important thing here is that we start to look at kind of what are these other standards, specifically 62.1 and 55. So 62.1 is a standard that's focused on minimum ventilation, so minimum fresh outdoor air. If you've ever been in a building and it feels stagnant and you start to get tired and it just feels like old air, you can almost taste it and smell it, you most likely are dealing with an improper economizer control situation. Basically, the outdoor air damper is not properly being controlled, thus you're not getting enough fresh air. CO2, which is what we exhale when we breathe, starts to build up, and all of a sudden, you've got an issue with poorly ventilated spaces. And then ASHRAE 55 is a really cool standard that I feel as if not enough folks really understand what this standard does. Because here's the deal. If you understand psychrometrics, which you really should if you're in this trade in any capacity, sales, engineering, facility operations, understanding psychrometrics is it's like the cost of entry. It's something you should know. Because once you understand it, you understand the interrelationships between temperature, humidity, enthalpy, heat that's in the air, heat that needs to be removed. I mean, it's like almost the Matrix moment where all the things that Neo is seeing turn into code, and then he can interpret and manipulate what he's seeing. I got so excited there, I whacked my mic. I was like, yeah! I really get fired up about this standard because if you understand what it means, it's really about thermal comfort and how you can have a higher temperature and a lower humidity, or a moderate temperature and a moderate humidity but more airflow. It talks about the interrelationships of temperature, airflow, and humidity. But here's the thing. If you don't have a building automation system, how are you going to control to these three variables? I mean, these are variables that are constantly changing, and I don't care who you are. You cannot honestly tell me that in a space you can control temperature, humidity, and airflow perfectly, or not even perfectly, even moderately as accurately as a building automation system can. So right off the bat, airflow and just overall control. But then we run into the second reason, which is you're shortening the life of your equipment. You know, when you're running things 24/7, you're running them 24/7. You're running them all the time. And that results in this equipment wearing down early. So just the runtime aspect of not having proper control of your HVAC equipment is reason enough to invest in at least a basic building automation system that gives you basic runtime control. Heck, with most of the modern HVAC equipment, you can use a BACnet interface and simply tie into that equipment and give it an enable and disable and set point command. I mean, even that is better than running stuff in manual. But there's a more insidious reason hiding and lurking below the surface that you really gotta narrow in on. And that is the upstream effects of improper control. So let's say you're running air handling unit 24/7. You've got the valve in hand and you've got the damper fully open. Even though it's 90 degrees, you're bringing in outdoor air. Cooling coil's 100% open. And you guys see this all the time at schools, at commercial office buildings. And you're running it like this. What is that doing to the upstream cooling towers and chillers? What if that's wintertime? What is that doing to the upstream boilers? That's causing you to waste a lot of energy, and it's causing wear and tear on these upstream units, the pumps, the chillers, the coils, all the things that are having to be used are being impacted by this improper control. So it's not just the unit, it's also your energy efficiency, and it's also the equipment efficiency. Which brings us to reason number 3. And it's you're paying more for conditioning your spaces. If we agree that you can't control a unit as efficiently as a building automation system can, and if we also agree with reason number 2, that you're shortening the life of your equipment and you're overworking your equipment because you're not properly controlling, then we can agree to reason number 3, which is you are paying more for conditioning your spaces because you can have things like competing control, where you're trying to modulate heating valves and cooling valves manually. Or you've got a chiller that's competing against 90-degree outdoor air that's coming into a damper that's fully open. Or, like I saw in this one building, they literally had a 6 by 6 foot hole cut in the wall, the exterior wall of the building, and there used to be a damper bank there. They removed the dampers because they got tired of having to adjust them manually. It just left a freaking hole in the wall. I mean, are you kidding me? And so you have all of these things that improperly controlled are going to drain your utility spend. They're going to make your techs have to troubleshoot cold and hot calls more often. So not only are you going to exhaust your financial resources, you're going to exhaust your operational resources. And even more importantly, you're going to be unaware that this is even happening, because quite often you're going to be in such firefight mode. Folks often ask me, Phil, how do these facilities descend into the chaos where they can never do any preventative maintenance? They're always reacting, and it seems like they're running around with their chickens with their heads cut off, and they're just like reacting, and it's craziness. Well, it all starts with proper control and proper monitoring. If you have proper control and proper monitoring, and you avoid the temptation for quick fix, put things in manual, and just disconnect control devices, that's how these things start. It starts with one air handler that you put in manual, and you disconnect the actuator because the actuator failed, and I'll order a new one, but then you don't order a new one, and one thing after another, these fail. They have downstream and upstream effects. Downstream meaning down to the space, upstreaming meaning to the main cooling and the main hot water systems, and it just compounds. It starts to compound and compound and compound, and that is what you're going to end up facing if you're not properly implementing and using a building automation system. I know this is so doom and gloom right now, but this is the reality that folks don't want to face. So often we don't want to paint the real picture for our customers. We're, for some reason, upset to challenge that. Operator who says, "Oh, I'm 65 years old. I've been running this since before BAS, before you were born. I know how to do this." Da, 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 da. That's like saying that I was born before computers, so I'm going to go get an abacus and do math rather than using a calculator. I mean, there's a reason for technology. It doesn't mean that you are any less of a man or less of a person. It just means that there's technology that can take the abilities and knowledge you have and make you even more effective. Get off your high horse and realize that technology is an augmenter, not a replacer. And that's what so many folks fear. That's what this really comes down to, is one of two things. They're fearing of being replaced, which in actuality, when you start to properly implement technology, oftentimes the pendulum swings in the other direction, especially if you haven't been maintaining systems for a long time. You'll find a lot of stuff you need to fix. And the second thing is they don't want folks to realize they haven't been doing the best they could be doing. They don't want to be called out for that, or they don't want folks to see, hey, I may not understand as much as I really say I understand. And those are the two kind of deep level fears that you're combating when you start to get that kind of pushback. Now, reason number 4, and this is more of a recent kind of shift, and I don't know if you've noticed it, but I've noticed it. At the time I'm recording this in February 2018, the smart home market is starting to accelerate. They're starting to come up with more stable ecosystems. The stuff is more plug and play. And so folks at their homes are starting to expect smart homes. Hey, Alexa, turn on the air, da 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 da. They are expecting that. But then they walk into an office building and it's damp and it's muggy and they got a pneumatic stat in the wall and they can't figure out how to make it work because they move the dial and it doesn't do anything because in reality the pneumatics is disconnected and it's just in hand and the actual actuator's been disconnected from the box and it's been left at like 45%, and they're getting pissed. And then they hear from their one buddy they go and visit him and his office is all nice and beautiful and well conditioned. How long do you think folks are going to continue to lease a space that is simply inefficient? And the thing is, folks are having a demand for smart spaces. They're having a demand for at least temperature control. I'm not talking that we're doing Starship Enterprise here and doors are opening for you and everything's voice activated. No, but folks at least expect to be able to change the temperature and see it react. Folks at least expect to have light control, but not even having those kind of things, that's where a lot of buildings are because they've just been left in the dark ages for so long. And that is becoming an increasingly, you could read about it all over the place. You go to any facility manager or commercial real estate periodical or website, you can read about the tenant demand for intelligent spaces. So it's not just me pulling something out of the air. It's an actual demand that is putting a lot of pressure on folks to modernize building automation systems. And the fear is that if I go and modernize this, how am I going to operate it? Once again, going back to those kind of primal deep level fears. I don't know what I'm doing. How do I operate this? I've always done it in manual. Will they find out I haven't been doing my job? And so much as a sales or technician or an engineer, you're just as much an empowerer as you are trying to convince folks to do this. You've got to empower them to believe in themselves that they actually can. I know that sounds kind of new agey, but that's the reality of where you're at. All right. So reason number 5, I wrote this down as you want to do more with less. And I would actually change this reason to be you have to do more with less. The reality is that there's a loss of talent. There's a lot of folks who are leaving the workforce and they're retiring and they're leaving, and then the trade schools aren't pumping out enough people. In school, we're not really teaching folks the trades, and building automation systems is like the best kept secret that if you really educate yourself properly and you make the right career steps, you could be making $100,000 a year, at least in the US, within 2 to 4 years. And for some of you who are like, Phil, I've been working 10, 20 years, and I'm still not making that in the U.S. Well, I'm going to be just honest with you. You haven't made the right career choices, or you've got learning gaps as far as what you need to know. You may not like to hear that. That may not be comfortable for you. But if you're going to achieve that next level, and who knows, maybe that goal of financial goal is not important to you. It may not be. To me, it is important. At least I'm honest with myself about what is important to me. But for you, that may not be important to you. But if it is important to you, you need to be honest with yourself about where you are skill set wise. It's not someone else's fault. It's not that someone didn't hire you. It's not that they're friends with so-and-so and that's why they get a raise and da-da-da. It's because you didn't make the right career choices or you don't have the right information. You don't have the right knowledge. The sooner you accept that and face that, the better off you'll be. Now, I realize it's going to turn a lot of folks off, but that's just the reality. and that's just what you've got to accept. All right, off my soapbox moment there, but like I said, we're losing talent. So back when I was in the Navy, they came out with this new destroyer kind of right towards the time I was finishing. It was called the Zumwalt or something like that. And it was this computerized building automation system. It's this computerized ship. And basically it took the average crew of 260 and reduced it to 130. Now, granted, the Zumwalt program got shut down. It cost too much to do. But as you've seen with a lot of building automation systems, we're seeing, and you could read about this time after time after time again, example after example, building that have adopted a building automation system and been able to do more with the same amount of people. Properly trained people with a properly implemented building automation system will be able to outperform a building without a building automation system. It's no contest. When you have a system that can automatically adjust to set point, can automatically trigger when there's a potential failure or a simultaneous heating and cooling situation, you're going to outperform someone who is relying on watching thousands of points by physically visiting the sensors. You got to realize that, right? If you don't have a building automation system, you're physically going to have to visit and monitor the sensors and devices in order to know they're operating properly. You can't do that without a building automation system. But more importantly, the talent there to operate this building automation system in manual is just disappearing. And you know what? You're going to hire new folks from my age group, and you're going to bring them in and tell them to operate stuff in manual, even though they realize that there's computerized building automation systems. They're going to leave and go somewhere with the computerized building automation system. They're not going to sit there and run around with a sling psychometer doing wet bulb sensing. I mean, come on. That's 1960s stuff. Yet we still do it today, and it's kind of scary. But you can't afford to do it because of the reduction in talent and the skill gap and just the labor pool gap. And finally, number 6, you want folks to come to the building. I mean, that's why you built the building. That's why the building exists. Now, I get it. In prisons, hospitals, and K through 12, you don't have much of a choice. But I would argue even in hospitals, you have a choice. I went to this one because I can't remember for the life of me. Was it in Chicago or was it in Seattle? I'm not sure. I think it was in Seattle. I went to this hospital in Seattle for some reason. And no, it may have been in Chicago. But I went to it for some reason. I thought to myself, I will never, even if I'm bleeding out on the table, go to this hospital. I mean, it was so bad. I mean, it was pneumatic stats, but I could see the pneumatic tubing hanging out. The space felt like, you know, that kind of basement feeling when it doesn't have proper sort of circulation and is really humid and muggy. It felt like that. I was like, I'm going to get a staph infection just walking around this hospital. That's how bad it was. And so the environment does have a dramatic effect on if people want to come to the building. And I work out of my house. I don't go to an office. Now, granted, I own my own business, so I can make that choice. But even when I didn't own my own business, I would spend as much time as I possibly could working out of my house because the spaces that I had to work in just weren't optimal. They were dreary. The temperature control was kind of terrible. There was a lot of noise. It just wasn't a good space for me to work in. And folks have those choices now. They have the choice to go and choose a building or maybe a home that is going to be optimal to their work habits, their work environment. And you want your space to be that, especially if you're in the commercial real estate market where you're going and doing that. But I'm also seeing that become increasingly important in the higher ed. Back when I started off, there was this kind of joke that you don't have to control dorm rooms. They're students after all. Who cares? But that is rapidly changing. You've got these students who come from homes with Nest thermostats, and then they go to these dorm rooms that have these shaky radiators that they have no control over. And students are becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the conditions, and they're expecting more modern conditions. Now, the other reason you want folks to come to the building is kind of another reason in itself, and it's about the sick building syndrome. I'm sure you've heard about this. But essentially, it's where VOCs and contaminants and things like that start to build up to the point where the building is unhealthy. I remember this story about this one guy who worked in an office, and this was told to me secondhand, but I trust the person who told me, so I didn't personally experience this. But essentially, the guy was sick, and he was really sick, and he kept getting sick and going to the doctor, and they couldn't figure out why. He was sick, he was sick, he was sick, he was sick. And then I think he went on vacation for a couple weeks, and he got better instantly. And then he came back to the office, and he was sick again. And this kind of triggered a thought in the facility manager's mind, and he was like, why is this guy getting sick? And then he realized that apparently the unit that was supplying to where this guy sat, and apparently this was the only guy sitting here because they just had a reduction of labor, and so he was just sitting in that area. And apparently the building had been retrofitted, and what used to be an outdoor air intake was now right at the loading dock. So all of the gas coming off of these trucks sitting at the loading dock was being sucked into the outdoor air and basically being supplied right to this guy as quote-unquote fresh air, but it was really toxic air, and it was causing him to get very, very sick. And once they realized this, they were able to go and immediately move the guy to a different space, which made him healthier, and then go and reroute the outdoor air path. But sick building is a really serious scenario, and at the low end of it, you just get headaches, you're tired because you're not getting proper outdoor air ventilation. But at the high end, you can have things like contaminants, mold, all sorts of buildups that can go and affect you and make you very sick. And so how do you avoid that? You avoid that with a building automation system. Now, let's say that you have decided that you need a building automation system, and or you're trying to convince someone that they need a building automation system, or you just work on building automation systems, but you feel like you don't know enough to be confident in that conversation. You feel like, when do I use a server versus a supervisory device? Why am I using this sensor versus that sensor? What am I supposed to do in this situation? What's going on is that most likely you don't have the fundamental knowledge of building automation systems that you need to succeed. You know what? I'm here to tell you that that's not your fault. Because most of you listening to this right now have just not had the opportunity to be educated in the fundamentals of building automation systems. You haven't had the opportunity to go and learn the foundational knowledge that you need to succeed in your career. At least you haven't had the opportunity until right now. I want to tell you about Building Automation Fundamentals, which is my most recent course, and it has had amazing results in the technicians, salespeople, engineers, and project managers that have gone through it. It's a fully online, on-demand course, like all of my courses, and it teaches you the fundamental knowledge you need to succeed in building automation. And right now, you can pick it up. It's open for enrollment. And you can also go and learn about these 6 reasons and see what these 6 reasons are on the show notes page at buildingautomation.monthly.com/103. That's the numbers 103. So I really encourage you to go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/103. Engage in the conversation in the comment section. And if you are one of those people who haven't been given the opportunity to have that building automation fundamental knowledge that you need to succeed in your career, I encourage you to pick up a copy of Building Automation Fundamentals. it'll be one of the best investments you've ever made into your building automation career. And with that, thanks a ton for being here. I love the listener feedback when you guys are giving me ideas about what you'd love me to cover in the future. Keep that up. I really appreciate that. One of the areas we're going to be discussing in great detail, may not be next episode, but it'll be within the next couple episodes, and that's going to be remote access. I've gotten a lot of questions about that lately. A lot of folks asking about remote access. How does it work? How do we implement it? What do we do? And we're going to be diving into that in one of the future episodes. So keep your suggestions coming. I look forward to seeing your comments, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I really appreciate it. It's an honor that you give me your time, and I want to give great quality educational learning lessons back to you. So thanks so much for letting me do that. And once again, everything I discussed today is going to be available at buildingautomationmonthly.com/103. Thanks a ton for being here, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care.